and we're all just wasting our time if God is not who he says he is, and is here even now with us to get through those difficult things. So, the first lesson that we can learn through their example is that it can, first and foremost, show us who we are. It will expose our character in any given situation, just like with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Just like Calvin's dad was talking about in the canoe in the rain, that character will be revealed in difficult situations. As we look at what these three guys have went through, we can see that they had some pretty big jumps in their ability to handle adversity. If we jump back to chapter 1, first and foremost, we notice that they survived. In the first couple of verses there, we know that they actually survived the siege of Jerusalem. It was a long, drawn-out process. So, yay, they're alive. They survived a horrible situation. They were probably active participants in the defense of the city. And so, anyone who has been involved in combat or war will tell you that combat is a way of making you grow up really quick. They were very young, but they grew up very quickly in just that one experience alone. In the next experience here in chapter 2 of Nebuchadnezzar's dream that their friend Daniel exposes and interprets through the Lord's power. They are somewhat active participants, but not much. They're there to support Daniel. They see the Lord working through him, and so they're observing, and they're growing in their faith in the Lord. That prepares them for what they're about to face. And also, in chapter 1, they are also supporting Daniel in his stand when he asks their captors for a change of food. So we don't want to eat what you have for us to eat. Can we please eat something else? And I think it's important to note that it's not a biblical endorsement of a vegan lifestyle. You're not going to see a cookbook coming out that says, water and celery, the Daniel diet, how to lose 60 pounds in 4 days. There's the Babylonians were eating animals that Moses had told the Israelites were unclean, and so they did not want to disobey God. Babylonians also like to mix blood in their wine, and also unclean, as God told Moses. But in these little things, they weren't really the star point. They were still growing and learning. So their character was being developed in those smaller situations, so that when they faced this big challenge in chapter 3, they were able to do so with confidence that the Lord would be with them. Oh, and they also got promoted. So they were all, at the end of chapter 2, when Daniel reveals the dream that is literally impossible, other than through the power of God, to not only interpret a dream, but to even know what the dream is in the first place, Daniel petitions the king, and they make Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, which, to be a comparison, would be Babylon was the biggest city of its day and age. 1 million people. It was almost 50 miles across, massive walls. It was literally an impenetrable fortress full of hedonism and very atheistic, weird things. And so as a result, they were now in charge of a lot of that. So, which leads us to the second thing, which we can learn, that when they faced this situation with King Nebuchadnezzar and the fiery furnace, the ultimatum, that they experienced God's very real presence in that exact moment. So the first thing that we can learn is that it will reveal our own character, and the Lord strengthening our character. But the next thing is that it will reveal God's presence. When they are bound and thrown into that furnace, that very second of their greatest need for God, He is there with them in a physical, mental, spiritual, in every possible way. He is there with them. And actually, Dad put a verse in the bulletin. I didn't know he did that, which says exactly what the Lord promised us. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, it says, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." And you'll notice that this verse does not say, "I will never leave you Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. It doesn't say, "I will never leave you except every other weekend and every fifth Monday and all throughout May. I go on vacation." No, praise the Lord, it says, "I will never leave you," not for a second, not for a moment. When we need Him the most, He will be there with us when we face those difficult things. And you can notice here that they actually had to call them out of the furnace. They were just hanging out. You would think, land, I'm still alive. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here. But instead, because of the presence of God, they were with the most amazing, the creator of the universe. And so they did not want to leave the presence of God. Even though they're in the middle of 7,000 degrees of blazing inferno, they would rather be with the presence of God than outside of it. And it's such a powerful thing that in the midst of the most stressful situation we can imagine in our lives is when God is going to be the closest to us, that we will feel His presence in real and powerful ways. And it also will be an important thing for our witness, our ministry to others, when they see how we can survive and keep moving forward in the middle of such incredible odds and difficulty. I saw a great quote from Pastor John Piper the other day. It said, "God is most glorified in you when you are most satisfied in Him, in the midst of loss, not prosperity, in the midst of pain, in the midst of the most difficult things in life, when we can say God is enough. He is enough. He is good, and He will take care of us. He will satisfy our hearts even in this situation." That's what makes God look glorious to the people around us. And that is what this broken world needs so desperately. It doesn't need a religion that says, "Well, if you trust in us, we're going to give you a BMW. If you pray enough or give enough money to the church, you won't have to deal with another difficult thing in your life." What we all need is a Savior who is with us in the literal or figurative flames of an incredibly difficult situation that we cannot possibly manage on our own. That is when He is most powerful, and when our witness and testimony is most powerful as well. So that's the second thing. The third thing, the lesson that we can learn, is that God will show us His plan, and He does it often in the midst of a very difficult situation, or possibly soon thereafter. It's not always. Sometimes we won't understand why we're going through a difficult situation in the middle of that thing. But as we look back, we can say, okay, that's why that happened. Or this is why this came about the way that it did. Totally not what I wanted to do, not my plan, not what I had in mind for my life, but I can see now that God worked powerfully and amazingly in whatever situation that might be. If you'll notice in chapter 3, the end of chapter 3, verse 29, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of these three men." King Nebuchadnezzar was the news source for the entire world at that time. If Nebuchadnezzar wanted the entire world to know something, they would know it. That decree went out to every single country, every single language, every single nation, and was explained as to, well, why is he telling us to not talk ill of this God of theirs? So God used their courage in that particular situation to spread the gospel and the power of what that meant to the entire known world at the time. They were in the midst of all of the grief of losing Jerusalem, of the thought process that our country is gone. We have been taken into captivity. Our faith our people are destroyed. And yet, in the midst of the most difficult situation, God used it to spread the gospel to the entire known world. Simply because they were able and willing to take that stand and do what God had asked them to do. So, briefly, we can go to those three very important tools that we can use to get through a difficult situation and not, hopefully, go insane. There's so many different, obviously varying levels of difficulty in our lives. But the first tool that we can see in this story specifically, is to be in the mindset of learning, to keep reminding yourself, what can I learn from this? What does God want me to learn from this? And how can I grow as a person and as a Christian through this particular situation, whatever it might be? And we can see it in their lives as they walk through these various trials with Daniel, that they are constantly learning and growing. And it changes our mindset. These three things are really pretty much all about our attitude. And when we can change how we are looking at a difficult situation, it can mean a difference between coming through it with so much more strength in our faith and our walk with God, or it's very easy to be a bitter person in this day and age. When we see things in our culture and society, people advancing, people getting wealthy and famous with no thought of God. And actually, in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 5, James says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." Well, we can see in this particular instance, they had to learn patience, and they had to wait for things to unfold. It doesn't tell us the time frame of how long it took to build the statue, to send out those decrees to every single nation, but it took time. And since they were in a position of leadership, it's very possible that they even were responsible in some way, shape, or form for helping to build the statue, to send out the invitations. So they had time to sit and unfortunately think about what was coming. It was not a last-minute snap decision, like, oh, we're going to have to dive down or stand up. Well, we'll stand up. No, it was something that they thought about probably for weeks, months, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. We can have time to get together, which I'm sure they did. They got together and talked about it and prayed about it and sought guidance from Daniel and from each other. But it also gives us the opportunity to sit and think about all the what-ifs and to dwell on all of that sort of thing. But they were in a position where they were learning from it. The second thing that we can do to get through difficult situations is to be looking out for how to care for others. And it seems a little bit counterintuitive when you say, well, I wish people would be caring about me in this difficult situation, in this loss, in this whatever the difficulty is. But when we seek out opportunities to care for others, it does several things. One, it helps to get our mind off of ourselves.